Brian,
Yeah?
could you let me in on my computer? I'm about to join in just a second. I'm on my phone right now.
Okay.
So my computer speaker is the one that doesn't work, my mic. So that's why I can talk on this and not on the computer.
Mm-hmm. I don't have you as waiting yet.
There it goes.
Okay. Here we are.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we're all here. So hello, good morning. Today what I want to do is go over the rubber stamp. Okay, we just lost somebody. Who did we just lose?
It was Ayana's phone, I think.
Okay. All right, you're good, okay. Today, what I want to do is go over the rubber stamps and the patterns. I think today is largely going to be dedicated to talking about how these pieces work, how to prepare drawings for rubber stamps, how to actually get them on the rubber, and how to carve them. That's mostly going to be today. The actual printing, I think we're going to hold off to start that until Monday of the second week of class. So if we get to a point where we're all carving or have carved our rubber stamps by the end of today, we'll be good. Depending on the complexity of your rubber stamps or how many of them you want to do, you may not finish them by the end of class, but that can just be something that you're working on, like in the time between today and between the beginning of our second week. That and the readings. As long as you have those readings taken care of and also the rubber stamps carved by the beginning of class on the Monday when we come back, you'll be in great shape, because I think we're going to start to mix up the paints so that we can make them into inks and then start to lay them out and physically print. Okay? So what you're going to want for today is your rubber, and my rubber is pink, but I think yours is going to be white because you went with the Mucarve, unless you got your rubber from another supplier. But your soft rubber, you're going to want your linoleum cutter, your blade with handle. You'll want a pencil and then also a Sharpie. And then I also find it helpful to have like a Sharpie pen or like, you know, a thin ink pen. And you'll want something that you can cut the rubber with. I see a dog. You'll want something you can cut the rubber with, like an X-Acto knife or like a box cutter of some kind. And then I also think you're gonna want your sketchbook nearby so you can make small drawings, and then some kind of scratch paper so you can test the rubber. And if you have an ink pad, like for stamps, that's a really helpful thing to test the rubber too, but it's not required. You don't have to have it. I think I've got mine like over there, so when we get to that point, I'll have to jump up and grab it. So that's what we want. But before we do that, I want to actually go over the PowerPoint I put together of previous student examples. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, get that all ready. Desktop. Okay. Can you guys see? Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
If anyone gets, I cannot see the waiting room now, so if anyone gets kicked out, just go ahead and interrupt, to unmute, go ahead and interrupt me and just let me know. Okay. So these are examples of other students from this class who actually kind of did the exact same thing you did. They went on like a grocery store trip and then created some patterns based off of their grocery store research. This is actually, you're looking at it in the racks. And so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 stamps that this artist used. And notice that the bacon, they actually just printed twice. And sometimes they printed it with sort of like in this element here, they printed it with the curves kind of facing each other. And in this element here, they printed it with the curves kind of spooning each other. The bacon kind of spoons each other. And that's just like creates like a nice visual rhythm. Additionally, they used color, I think, in a really effective way. So there's a series of diagonals in the printing. But there's also kind of color bars between red, green, and yellow. I think that they just thought like a fourth color would be too much. And actually, looking at this now, I think they did do a fourth color where the tomato was printed in red, and it just felt really busy. So they just printed the tomato in yellow to create that diagonal. And so what I like about this is that there's subtle alterations in every row. Like notice, like when you look at the diagonal of the lettuce turns right side up and upside down. The bacon goes horizontal and vertical and also kind of spoons each other and faces each other. And then the variation in the yellow diagonal, actually, there's a variation between the elements. It goes from tomato to mayonnaise, tomato to mayonnaise. And it's all based around a BLT, which I think is just very cute. This is a fairly literal translation of like the grocery store research trip. This person just has an affection for sandwiches, which I can totally understand. And they just wanted to actually take the elements of a sandwich and kind of lay them out like on a pattern. And what I really like about this project is if you look at any one of these stamps, they're not really very elaborate. I mean, like the bacon is really just a wavy, thick line with 2 carved thin lines inside of it. The lettuce is very straightforward. The tomato is very straightforward. And yet, I think when you repeat something and print it in this way, it actually starts to feel really sophisticated. This was a demonstration that I made for the class. It's just a Georgia peach with kind of a seal shape, and I just alternated between black and red. And I just, I actually thought it turned out really nicely. I particularly like this piece here, which is just the same 2 stamps, but printed onto kind of like a cardstock craft paper that I had. And that was a really nice contrast between the orange and the brown of the paper, as opposed to the orange and the white of the paper. I liked this, but I really liked this. I've actually since cut this up and used this as like a background for various elements. But I thought that this came out really well. And I mean, again, it's just an outer shape of a peach with a single carving inside it. And that's one of the reasons I really like this project for this class, is that I think you can be really detail-oriented and very sophisticated in the carving and drawing of your stamps, as this artist did with her slice of pie that's topped with whipped cream. Or you can be actually quite simple and straightforward and just kind of carve very simple shapes. And also notice the quality of the print. It varies from one piece to the next. Like this peach is kind of a little starved for ink. And like this black seal is like not as solid as like this black seal, for example. And those little variations between kind of one element and the next, I think they actually really contribute to the overall quality of the finished product. It is a pattern, so it starts to feel mechanized, but those variations in ink quality and pressure and printing, I think that those actually do a lot to make them feel handmade, which is just a really nice quality. So this, I believe was based on smoothies and got the little blender.
I think Ayana's locked out.
Okay. Okay, 1 second. We're going to stop the share. Okay.
Oh, never mind. I think she's back in.
Okay, there she is.
That might have been old sketch.
It looks
No.
like
Sorry. My carver was back ordered, so I've got to go to Michael. So I just wanted to get back in on my phone. I'm sorry.
okay, are you gonna just bring us on the phone?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, okay, that sounds good. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Let me go ahead and get back to share screen. And just if that happens, just do that again. That worked out. That's the best case scenario. And let me go back to the screen share. Where did my slideshow go? Okay, there it is. All right, so smoothie-based print. We've got the blenders making vertical lines here. And then I thought this was pretty clever. This is, of course, the same stamp, but just by changing the colors, it really changes the flavor of the piece. And we go back and forth between like lime and orange and lime and orange. And, you know, just very simple vertical rows, but very effective color variation. And, you know, really just very sensitively carved and very sweet stamps. And by the way, we're looking at pages that are like maybe 11 by 17. Like that's how big this piece is. It's not super huge. So the stamps are not very large. This is just all one stamp and just really carefully printed, you know, kind of allowing the corner of the lips to just sort of sit inside the corners of the other lips. And look at all the beautiful variation that happens. There really is just like a lot of movement and energy inside this. And it's just very sweet. This is another piece. This guy really got into the stamps. He, I think I was asking everybody to make like 3, and I feel like he made like 10. Like he got really into the stamps, and then he made a bunch of patterns, did them in kind of every configuration you could imagine. And after the class was over and he was doing his like Pair Pro, he would come back to Piedmont on the weekends and be like, can I use this print studio to make more patterns? I'm like making a card for my dad for Father's Day, stuff like that. He just got really into the stamps, which is very sweet. And so these were stylized animals that were based off of some stylization that he saw, I believe, on like a whiskey label or like a wine label. I think it might have been like that Apothecary brand of wine. But he drew some animals like this kind of wolf, like I think it might be like a kind of warthog and like a crow in this very sort of stylized way. And it's just, they're printed in diagonals and they're just, you know, rotated. He changes the orientation each time. It's all one color, but notice just like how beautiful those patterns kind of create like just kind of movement and form on top of this. I like this piece quite a bit. Additionally, you can see here where my cursor is. This is sort of a byproduct of the linoleum print process or like any kind of relief print making process. As you'll soon see, we make these by carving elements away. And when you carve away a large white area, there's a little bit of, I call it static, like visual fuzz or visual static. This is like the little bits of rubber that, even though they're carved away, they pick up a little bit of ink. And when you stamp them, you definitely stamp your main image, but you also stamp a little bit of the area where you carved away. And, you know, some people really enjoy that. Some people really don't like it. I think, you know, I think this is a piece where it's like we're looking at just enough. It doesn't really disrupt the image. It kind of actually adds to it in some ways. It really like he's getting a lot of it like in this row here, which makes it a little bit different than this row here. And I think it actually just adds a nice quality to the piece. Again, it looks handmade, which is exactly what it is. This is another one of that guy's pieces, a mushroom. Again, you can see a lot of the static. Here, he's just kind of flipping them back and forth. This is actually 2 different pieces. I think he had 2 different mushrooms. I can't tell. Oh, no. Yeah, he had 2 different mushrooms. For a second, I thought he took this one, carved more off of it, and then printed it in red. What I do think he did is he printed all the black ones and then all the red ones, rather than go back and forth. So he printed the black ones and left a space for the red ones, and then turned the piece upside down and printed all the red ones. So here is the actual process. Usually what I encourage students to do is to have the printing paper that they're printing on and I have them sit it on top of a piece of scratch paper. So when they get to like the edge of their piece, like here, they had to sort of stamp off the edge of the page, and they can stamp onto the scratch paper. And that just kind of gives you a nice, a bleed effect. It's called a bleed print, where the image appears to go off the edge. That gives you a nice effect. And I really liked what this woman was doing, where she started with a central image, and then she had these elements that radiated outwards. But I don't have a picture of this finished piece. This is the print studio at Piedmont, and this is the drying rack. And so here's like a bunch of pieces that were drying in the rack, and I thought that there was just like a lot of really beautiful color going on here. And then this is images from the final critique. So this is, there's students' artist books. There's also, we did these other projects with the press, these monotype pieces. And then there's their patterns. And you can sort of see the effect that they have when they're kind of hung next to each other. I really like this, minimize this. I really like this pair of pieces here. These are the same stamps, but you can see just how different the patterns are just by changing the orientation. And so this is actually just like an abstract form. Like it's all one stamp, but she changes the orientation and changes the color to create this really rhythmic, beautiful piece. And here it's a little more uniform because all of the pieces match up. Just thought that was really interesting. Okay. There's that. Okay. So I hope that kind of gives you a little a little bit of insight into what we're doing. And like I always find it helpful to sort of look at previous examples of things. And so these are the students who've done the same thing that you did. They had done the same materials. They did use oil-based ink, which I think might have a little bit more control in the printing process. Our prints may end up looking a little more crude because we're printing at home. We're using acrylic paint that's been converted to ink or like an ink-like material. So it's really going to be an experiment for us, but I think we can make it work. But I think that in looking at those pieces, you get a little bit of a sense of what's possible. And I'm going to look and see if I can find one thing. I thought that this was in the slideshow, but I guess not. I'm going to look on my desktop. I wanted to show you one piece that was really interesting. I'm just looking through my folder here. Yeah. I'm going to open this up this JPEG. And I'm going to share my screen one more time, and I'm just going to talk about this one. Okay. So this is a print that was created just from 3 stamps: the corn, the gun, and the bullet. And I thought that this was just a really interesting piece. So this was from the class I taught. I taught this class in 2016. It was actually the first time I taught it and the first time I did this project. And in 2016, the open carry laws had not been in effect for very long. So it was still kind of a shock, and maybe it still is a shock for some of you, to go to the grocery store and see someone like, with a gun in a holster. And so, we all went to the grocery store in Demarest. And while we were there, one of the students saw this man with a gun. And I had, of course, told them all to kind of look for unusual moments. And, she definitely clocked that as an unusual moment. And like later, when she was sort of processing her list of things, she's like, I think that one of the most striking things that I saw was a gun in the grocery store. And so she made this little gun and then a bullet piece. And then she also made this corn. And when she was kind of carving all the stamps, she had some that were food and some that were weapons. And when she printed them together, I just actually thought that, I think that the piece itself is actually very interesting. But if you start to really think about what you're looking at, it's just like, gosh, how strange to actually like see like a gun next to an ear of corn. And in some ways, like the strangeness of the pattern, I think is a reflection of the strangeness of the experience. that she was having, you know, to like, how strange to be in a grocery store and look up and just like see someone armed. And so that is like, that's like in some ways like a less literal translation of this project. And I think that that's a totally relevant way to go. Like I definitely think that the pieces where it's just like, I'm gonna make a BLT print and I'm gonna make bacon and bread and tomato and mayonnaise. Like, yeah, that's awesome. I mean, those are really wonderful and they're very charming. But I also think that there's another way to go about it where it's just like, okay, I'm just gonna think about the types of experiences I had like in the space and see if I can make a pattern that somehow reflects that. And one of the ways that that student did it is just by putting these two dissimilar things next to one another to create an experience that is a little bit of an unusual juxtaposition. I thought that was very clever and very smart. I've actually, I think I didn't put that one in the slideshow because I think that that one requires a little bit of explanation. But I like that quite a bit. So the other one that I want to draw your attention to specifically is I had those shots of the installations of prints, like when they're all hanging on the wall. And there was the two versions of the print where it's the same stamp, it's the same colors, but just by changing the orientation, the student was actually able to make two different pieces. It's kind of like orange and purple. And that little stamp is just a total abstract form that's derived from like typography and shapes from the grocery store. So it's not like a picture of mayonnaise. It's not like a little carving of an ear of corn. It's actually just like an abstract shape that when repeated makes an interesting pattern, but it's not representational. And so that too, I think, is another way to go with this. And I also think combining the two, like combining abstract forms, like I had my little seal certificate shape, my like round shape with all the little spikes on the edge of it, next to a very simplified peach. And kind of playing those off of one another, I think, is another way to go. So I think that's all I have to say about prior student examples. And if you guys are okay with it, I'm going to go ahead and start to talk about like the carving process and how to prep the stamp and go with that. But before I do that, are there any questions, or does anybody have any questions or comments about the patterns? Anything that you notice? Jessica.
We don't have to do vegetables and fruits and stuff.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just like, okay, great. Awesome. Thank you. And it doesn't have to look exactly like we're trying to get inspiration from the stuff that we got, but it doesn't have to look exactly like anything, right?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be grocery related at all.
Okay.
In putting together my PowerPoint, I was like, oh, a lot of these are, for whatever reason, the ones that I have pictures of, I feel like a lot of them are like grocery store related, and they are like they're obviously derived from a grocery store, and they are like representational prints of like items from a grocery store, like a slice of pie or an ear of corn. You don't have to do that. That's just the ones that I had, and I show that I wanted to show those to you more as an example of like, some of them I think are very rendered, like they're very carved. Like the pie, I think is actually just a really beautiful drawing. And some of them, like frankly, like my peach, is very crude. It's just like a crude shape, and either work. And so I think you can kind of approach this from more than one way. In fact, I would encourage everybody to have stamps that are a little more deeply carved and have more detail and elements to them, and also some that are maybe just simpler shapes. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Of course, yeah. Anybody else? Okay. So how many of you have done like linoleum prints or relief prints like with your students before, or some version of? Okay, cool. Has anyone done potato stamps? Okay, cool. This is like very similar. I think you can get more detail out of these stamps than the potato stamps, and they last longer, obviously. So I think, you know, if you have done this before, you'll be a little bit familiar. But if you haven't done it before, I think it's, like I said, what I like about this process is that it is kind of quick to learn and it yields pretty good results. Even the first try. Okay, so what I've done is I've actually pinned my video of my hands. So I'm looking at my work surface here. I've got my green cutting mat like underneath my stuff because I think it might be a little bit easier to see what I'm doing if I don't have like a white table background underneath. And so I've got my little piece of rubber. And one of the things that you can do, this is like, I'm actually working on like another pattern project right now. And so these are just like ink drawings that I was making on a piece of paper that are like essentially graphic and can be translated into like simple graphic forms. And I think what I'm gonna do for this demo is this little lightning bolt. I'm actually just gonna transfer this onto my rubber and carve this and then test it. Because it's kind of a fairly straightforward form, it's very linear, and I think I'll be able to kind of do it kind of quickly so you guys won't be sitting here waiting for me to finish carving so you can get to yours. So there's a couple different things I can do. I grab one thing I can do is I can actually, I can work out the details of the drawing on a piece of paper and I can just draw it directly on the rubber. Like I don't have to transfer it or do anything special. I can actually just draw it directly on. There's absolutely no problem with that. And if you feel comfortable with that, I say go for it. What I like to do is I like to start with a piece of rubber that's bigger than my stamp and then get my drawing on my rubber and then cut it down after I have my drawing on there. That way, I'm not like cutting my rubber too small and then trying to cram a little tiny drawing on it. And another thing you can do is if you have your big sheet of Mucarve, like your big piece of rubber, you can actually get multiple drawings on there and sort of carve all of them and then cut the stamps out after the fact. Either way works. This is like just a piece that I had left over. And so I'm gonna go ahead and actually make a stamp that's about half this size. I've got my drawing here. And one of the things I can do is I can just use tracing paper. So my drawings that I prepared for this, I did them in ink on white paper so that when I put a piece of tracing paper, I can actually see it very clearly and it'll transfer really nicely. If anybody has ever gotten a tattoo before or been in a tattoo parlor or knows anyone who gets a tattoo, you might be familiar with tattoo flash, which is like, it's like a whole bunch of little drawings that are crammed onto a single page. And they're often done in a very bold graphic style so that they can be easily copied. I think that's actually not a bad way to go for this. Like to have a bunch of drawings that you've made that you can then put tracing paper on top of and transfer. And so I'm just gonna go ahead. Trace my lightning bolt. And by the way, I am definitely not looking at the computer at this point. So if anybody gets kicked out, just holler at me. You will not hurt my feelings. Okay. So here we are. Just got like a little tracing of my lightning bolt. I just kind of traced around the lines. And I'm just going to go ahead and use my Sharpie pen and just blacken that in. I can also, if I'm feeling bold, I can just trace it directly with the Sharpie. I can kind of skip the graphite. All right, here we are. So obviously, I've got plenty of rubber stamp to fit my lightning bolt on. So that's good, that's good. But like I said, I like to actually get my drawing on there and then cut it down after the fact, so I'm not trying to like, so it takes some of the like wiggle room out of it. If I cut my rubber down to the exact size of my drawing beforehand, then I find it very difficult to like physically get it on there and not like, it just becomes stressful. Why stress yourself out? Once I've got an ink drawing, like a black ink drawing of my drawing on the tracing paper, I'm gonna turn it over. And I'm just gonna take my pencil and actually just put graphite on the back. A little bit of the transfer right there. And so what I've done is basically just made like a little piece of carbon paper. And I can now use that to transfer in graphite onto my rubber. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the way I'm looking at this drawing right now, that's the way it's going to transfer onto my rubber. But when I print it, it's going to print backwards because it's a print, right? So I'm carving this lightning bolt so that it kind of goes to the right and then goes down. But when I print it, my lightning bolt is actually going to go to the left and go down. It's going to be a mirror image of it, okay? So if I want it to look like this when it's printed, I need to transfer it like that. Okay, but I'm actually okay with it looking like in reverse when I print it. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer it this way, but just be aware when planning your images and transferring your images that if you want them to look like the way that you drew them, you need to transfer them backwards. Okay, especially be aware of this if you use text. Okay, any kind of text or letters that you carve, you're definitely going to want to carve those and transfer them backwards on the block so that when you print them, they're legible. So I'm just going to go over basically just kind of coloring it in with graphite. Ta-da. And so I have a very kind of loose drawing of my lightning bolt on there, just like the key lines. And what I can then do, just to be sure I'm happy with it, is redraw it with my Sharpie. Okay. There we go. There we are. And once I've got it down, I'm going to go ahead and trim. And the wonderful thing about this rubber is that it is just super easy to cut. I can just run my X-Acto blade down it, and it cuts like really beautifully. All right. So I've got my drawing on my stamp. It's a little, it's kind of a little stained and filled with graphite, but that's okay. What I want to do now is actually get my blade in my handle. And did you guys get multiple blades with your linoleum handles, or did you just get one? I can't remember.
I have multiple.
Multiple? Okay. Okay. The bottom of the handle comes off. Like you can kind of pop this a little bit off, and then there's a little chamber in here where you can keep the blades, which is very cool. I think that the number 1 and the number 2 are the most useful. The number 1 cuts very, very thin lines, and the number 2 cuts lines that are slightly thicker. So those are kind of the two that I use, the 2 blades that I use the most. Okay. If you've ever used one of these things, what you can do is you can unscrew them, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, and there's a little ball inside, and there's a metal plate that is underneath the metal ball, and that is actually where you slip the blade. So the metal ball sits on top of the curved, sort of dull side of the blade. And if you unscrew it, you can actually slide the blade in all the way up to the rounded part. And then once it's kind of in there and it won't go any further, what I do is I grab the metal part of the handle and the blade and I turn them together, or I turn the handle and I tighten the whole thing. So that's really in there. Okay. And then from here, what I can do is I can start carving. Now the reason I like this project is because the rubber carves so easily. But that said, these are still like blades, so they can still cut you. So you really want to be conscious that you're not carving towards your hand, or carving towards your thumb, or carving towards like the webbing in between your thumb and your index finger. You only do it once, but trust me, like if you poke yourself like in the webbing between your fingers with like a blade, it really sucks. I actually was doing a demo in front of a class of students and I stabbed myself with it and I just went, oh, and I let go of the handle and then the blade was just like stuck in my hand like this. And it was quite the scene. It was awesome. So just be careful. You know, they are blades, they are careful, or they are dangerous. But the nice thing about this is that it requires very little pressure to actually cut and carve. So you're never really like forcing it across. So you're not really getting a lot of momentum. So everywhere I cut is going to print white, and everything that I leave will print black. I'm going to carve my stamp in such a way that it essentially recreates my drawing. So I'm going to cut away everything but the lines of the lightning bolt, and I'm going to try and actually vary what I cut away so that I have 2 line weights. I've got kind of the thicker outline. Get back to my drawing. I've got like the thicker outline that runs all the way around, and I've got the thinner outline that defines sort of the interior kind of like shapes. Again, it's not complicated. It's not like a super complex image, which is good because number one, I mean, it's like real small, right? Like there's a Sharpie, there's my stamp. So it's like, we're not talking about like a real big image here. I mean, like you can't, I suppose you could get very detailed on the scale, but it's very challenging. And number two, it doesn't really need to be very detailed because I'm going to repeat it in such a way that it will actually kind of gain graphic strength through repetition. It doesn't necessarily need to have a great amount of graphic strength as a singular element, because it really won't be a singular element. It'll be part of a pattern. I hear this a lot from students. They really enjoy the carving. Like they find it very zen, very meditative. There's one class I had where one woman was just like, anybody who wants me to do their carving, I'll do it for you. Okay. So what I'm doing is I've just been carving around the outer edge, just kind of trying to articulate that outer form. I'm going to start carving the interior. I'm going to point with my pencil. Let's start carving the interior. And I really want to make sure that the tips of my lightning, like the points, are nice and pointy, because I think that's just going to be like, it's just kind of a key like visual element. So I'm going to switch to my very thin number 1 blade. Slide that in. Turn the handle. And if you have a scrap piece of rubber, this is kind of too big to be considered scrap, but if you have like a smaller scrap piece of rubber, like whenever I switch blades, sometimes I'll carve a little bit on a scratch piece of blade just to get a sense of like, how does the new blade feel and what kind of mark does it make, and that can be a really helpful thing. I'm going to switch because I really want to be careful and get that tip really nice and pointy. Okay. Okay. So you can see I'm starting to actually define the interior of my image. I'm carving away that large interior shape. And my number one allows me to get kind of like nice pointy little corners, which for this image is very important. It's geometric, it's not organic. So I've got these kind of nice sharp edges that I want to get. Once I kind of get to the middle, if I want to actually carve out the middle a little bit quicker, I can switch back to my larger blade. There we go. Okay. So while I was working on this, I kind of thought, like, how can I make this like a little more graphically strong? Notice this like little drawing of a peach right here. I feel like this has been like a peach heavy day. Like I've been showing you guys a lot of peaches. Um, but like it's like a bold graphic line, but notice like I've got this little element that is kind of like shading, like the little shadow between the halves of the peach, and how it's kind of made through cross hatching. Like that back and forth, positive, negative that's created through the little lines, that can translate into this medium really well. So I actually think I'm gonna try and create, oops, I'm gonna try and create a similar effect in the two small sections of my lightning bolt. Like I think I'm actually gonna carve cross-hatching right there and cross-hatching right there. This will be open because I just cut it, but I think I'm gonna try and actually use my number one blade to make like a gray right there. So it's a little bit of an experiment. I didn't actually think about this. But the nice thing is I can carve this, and if I don't, and I can test it, and if I don't like it, I can actually just carve it away, right? And that's the thing with linoleum, right? Or relief prints. You can always take away more. You can't put it back, but you can always carve away more, right? So I like to print. I like to carve and then test and then print and say, how do I like this? And then carve away more. And when you're carving an image and printing an image, just carve less than you think you ultimately need, just to experiment with what you get. Excuse me, just 1 second. I got a Piedmont email, and I want to make sure that's not someone having issues with the class. It's not. Okay, it's something else. Okay. That just kind of made little hatch marks in it. Let me go ahead and carve away the rest of the sides, and then I will test it. Okay, so I think that this is good to go. And if I want to check it, I'll show you a really cool trick. You can take a Sharpie, and what you can do is just very carefully run your Sharpie across the top. And blacken it in and really kind of see how the image reads. Okay? Additionally, you can do that while you're carving. So you can actually carve the main areas colored in black and then carve in to the Sharpied surface into the black, and that, like, what you carve is going to read like white, and it's going to print that way too. So that can kind of help you while you're carving, sort of conceptualize what it is you're looking at. Let me test it. I'm going to grab my ink pad and type. Oh my gosh, I can't. Seem to have misplaced it. Hang on. You guys, I am so sorry. I cannot find it. That is crazy. I had it in here. Like, it's somewhere in here. Like, I took it out of my thing like before class and like had it sitting up, but I've set it somewhere and I can't find it. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna keep looking, but I feel like at this point, like, we might be at a point where you guys feel like you can start working on your own. Yeah? Does anybody have any questions about this? No? Okay. Yeah, Jessica.
Are we able to do like larger quadrants and then like does it have to be little stamps that have individual things on them, or can it be larger quadrants of a few different things within the stamp and then you like flip it, you like move it around?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I actually think it's better if they're larger because you can do more detail. You can do more with them, and to print like a large surface using only a stamp like this, it'll just take a long time. Like, when you have a large element, you might stamp like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times across, and that's it. This is going to be, if I want a really dense pattern, this is going to be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's like I'm going to be trying to get them in like straight lines. So I actually think bigger is better. I went small just because I was demoing this process and I just didn't want to take like a super long time while you guys watched.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, for sure. So bigger is better, but I also think a mix is good. You know, if you have small ones in there with the big ones, then you're golden.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Anybody else? No questions? Okay, I will say one more thing. Another thing about this material is that you can use both sides. So I actually could carve another image on the back, and that's a way to get like more bang for your buck. And I really enjoy that because, you know, as is often the case, I'm stretching the budget. So like, why not actually try and get like twice the amount of imagery for the money? I do think though it's helpful to have an image. If you do have a double-sided stamp, you want your images to be like of equal size. So I wouldn't want like a very big stamp that has a very detailed image, and then on the back, I carve away almost everything except for something right in the middle. That's going to become kind of difficult to print. You want sort of like your images to be of equal size. Okay? Alternately, I had a student who was really kind of like a craft, he just got really into the craft of things. And he carved a bunch of beautiful stamps that he then actually mounted onto wooden blocks. So he took the rubber and essentially glued it to like a piece of scrap wood, sanded the edges. He even took the stamp and stamped it on the handle of the wooden block so you could actually see what the image was. And that made them very easy to grip, and they were just like really beautiful finished objects. But obviously, if you mount it on a piece of wood, then you're only getting to use one side. Okay? So I'm going to let you guys actually spend a little bit of time preparing and getting drawings onto rubber. Maybe you actually have already started. I would love to just sort of like check in with you on the progress. I'm just going to walk away from my screen, but I'm in here. I really want to find that ink pad, and I'm just going to start like tearing the place apart to look for it because now I carved it and I want to test it. But if we all just want to hang out and draw and carve for a little bit, I'd love to check back in with you in like maybe like 30 or 45 minutes, and we can take like an official break, and then we can come back and maybe do some carving and sort of see where we are after that. Does that sound good? Okay, let's do that. I'm up. Sound is on. If you want to just holler at me, I'm in here. I'm just gonna keep looking for that ink pad. Hey y'all, you guys there? Hey Carol, Jessica, Gabrielle, Isaac. Oh, Ayana, I see your thumbs up, Ayana. That's good. How is carving going? There's Roxana. So how are we doing? Are we drawing? Are we carving? Where are we at?
I'm currently drawing, but I'm also just jumped on my meeting, so I will be right back.
Okay,
But I am
okay.
drawing.
Ayana's still drawing, but going well. Okay.
I'm still drawing.
Still drawing?
Mm-hmm.
Something I do want to recommend is, of course, like when you stamp the image, there's a kind of flattening out that happens, right? So you're really working in linoleum with positive and negative. Like, you know, it's carved or it's not. It's white or it's black, or whatever color you printed in. And so I think if your image has areas that are just uncarved up against images that are open and more carved, like that kind of contrast can be really nice. Individual stamps having large positive shapes and large negative shapes, I think it just make like a really beautiful piece like when you're finished. But I also think variety is the name of the game. And so some of your stamps, like I said, could truly be image-based. They can also just be kind of simple abstract shapes or designs. And like even something that's image-based can start to become abstract if it's repeated like many, many times. And I think that was definitely exemplified by the label that Jessica found when she went to the grocery store with like the little figures that, because they were repeated so many times, we didn't really see them as figures. And so that is, I think, is kind of an interesting element to play with. Anybody want to share any drawings in progress or things that they're working on?
I'll share.
Okay, what you got, Lori?
So I, excuse me, I used a viewfinder. I enlarged my photos on my iPad and then used a viewfinder just to find some different
awesome.
areas.
Yeah.
So like this was part of a chip bag.
Uh-huh.
This was actually an unusual point, like my feet and the arrows that they've now have on the floors. This was a extension cord that was rolled up. This is some text on the mini Cokes.
Yeah.
Olives in an olive jar up close and stuff. And this one right here is one that I chose to transfer over.
Cool.
And it's at the bottom of a bunch of carrots and all the little like roots that were still attached to the clump.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I added a little bit more roots because I like the way they look.
Yeah, I think that's totally fine. Yeah, I mean, I think those are all really interesting, and I think when you crop on them, of course, the shapes become really abstract, and then when they're repeated and the orientation changes, it's going to be really cool. I actually like the one with the olives, with the sort of like round forms on either side. I thought that's really nice. I also have to say, making your drawings line-based and then filling them in with that green, like I'm not sure if like ink or watercolor or something that you're sort of filling in, I think it really allows you to think through, like, you know, what do I carve, what do I not, what's open, what's closed. And that I think is a nice way to sort of think through these drawings for sure. Yeah, awesome. Cool. Anybody else?
Come on, you guys.
Come on. Carol? Oh, okay, yeah. Are they in graphite, so they're kind of faint? Oh, I think you're muted. Oh, cool. How did you, what is this guy based on?
There was a package. This was the image I had.
I see. Okay. Okay. So that's like the label of something or the exterior packaging?
Yes. I think
Yeah.
it was chips or something. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Okay.
Just really liked the, I don't know, organic teardrop shapes, kind of.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of like that. I mean, you sort of forgot like what it is. It's like, I mean, I think actually when it's like you are, when you manipulate something a whole, I think I like kind of forgetting what the original source is not at all a bad thing, because then it's like it really becomes your own. Cool. Okay. Anybody else?
Mine is a lot more like conceptual and
Okay.
like storytelling based.
Okay.
One
what
of
you
the
got?
images, it's still very like don't even really have drawings.
Oh, okay. It's still in progress.
Yeah, it took me a long while to put the ideas together. One thing that I did find at the grocery store was like a fox.
Uh-huh.
So then I started playing with the idea of like, if you give a mouse a cookie, if you take a fox to the grocery store.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So it's going to be a fox and what its lunch would look like.
Okay, it's a fox and what its lunch would look like. All right, awesome. Love it. We have a fox that comes to our front yard like in the mornings. The sound that they make is like so insane. Like it's like it almost sounds like two cats, but it's one fox, you know? It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're cool animals. Awesome.
Yeah. I have a dog and I like to claim he's a fox. So I'm already obsessed with them. So that's the direction that I want to go in.
What does happen when a fox goes to the grocery store?
Or it would definitely be an unusual happening.
Yes, it would be. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
That's my dog. So.
Oh, cute. That's sweet. Okay. Anybody else?
All right. I am focusing on more of like the pandemic side of the grocery store.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know if y'all can see it. I did it light. This is just some carnations that I turned into a pattern.
Uh-huh.
And then I got like, you know, the mask, the Purell, a dead fly. Like, I just think it's interesting. I don't know if y'all can see. Just like, you know, juxtaposing the growth with the death with the mask.
Uh-huh.
So hopefully that works out some way, but
I like the dead fly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Especially at a grocery store, you know, when things are trying to be sanitary already.
Yeah.
That was interesting for me.
Yeah, totally. That reminds me, I was talking yesterday about like people don't want to walk down an aisle when they see you with a camera. Like I was in a grocery store, it was years ago, and like all the way on the left side of the store was like a cold case with like butter and eggs and milk and like and the cream cheese and all the stuff that'd be kept cold. And like people just like weren't on that side of the store. And as I was heading that way, because I needed like butter, somebody was like coming from that way and they just went, "Don't go over there." And I was like, but they didn't say why. And so then I was really intrigued. And when I did, there was just a bird like trapped in, it was inside the building and it was just like flying around like inside like the dairy aisle and just like landing on the side and kind of like flapping around. And it's I mean, it's like the most normal thing in the world, a bird. But as soon as you bring a bird indoors, it's like a totally crazy situation, you know? And like nobody was gonna like buy any food that the bird touched. Like it was insane. Yeah. But yeah, I do think that like, I was talking about this with my partner at dinner last night. And I was saying like, yeah, I had them look for unusual situations. And he was like, the whole experience of going to the store is an unusual situation in this time. And I was like, yeah, that is absolutely true. I feel kind of bad that I said, no, I said, you know, go there and don't shop, because like, I probably should have said, do this and do your shopping at the same time to minimize the number of times you have to go into a public space. But I think we all took precautions, and we all did everything that we can.
Well, I was, you know, drawn to all the patterns and everything as an artist. That's what I was looking at, and the abstraction and everything. But then it's like, just the masks and the shields and everything is so in your face. It's like I almost couldn't get past like people trying to stay on the other side of the aisle or following the directional pass through the aisle at Publix. Like I was trying to focus on the little things and I just couldn't because of the big pandemic based.
We are living in such through such an exceptional it's a significant moment in history. And although I think it's in some ways like the furthest thing from everybody's mind, I mean, I actually think art making is a type of documentation of historical events, right? And like so it's like, it feels a little weird to even be thinking about making art right now. But I also think that we should be doing that, because when people look at it later, they will sort of have a sense of like what it was like to be alive during this period. And like, I was talking about this with one of my colleagues. I mean, think about the Diary of Anne Frank, which is like this like completely significant work of literature, but was actually written by somebody who it's like, I mean, it seemed like writing a memoir would have been the furthest thing from her mind at that point. And yet it gives us this like amazing ability to sort of like inhabit the space of this moment in time that was, number one, awful, but number two, like definitely significant. And so I don't know, I mean, that is kind of an interesting thing to think about, is like, how do these sort of strange things find their way into our work?
Well, even the corn and gun artwork you showed us too got the wheels turning of how it could be like a little time capsule for the weird world we are currently living in.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, that piece was really interesting because although I don't think I put it in the slideshow, I think I might have actually, I don't know, maybe I shared it on social media, or maybe she did. And that was like right when it was all happening in Georgia. And it had such interesting responses. People were just like, I can't believe that this is what's going on. Like people were on one side of the fence, and then other people were just like, oh my God, that's like the coolest thing I ever seen. And can I get that printed on like, you know, a swimsuit or something like that? I mean, it was crazy. Yeah, I don't know. I do think I am glad that the pandemic in some way is kind of like coming into things, because although it's difficult to think about, and of course not a pleasant thing to think about, I also think it's the circumstances that we're living in. Have you guys noticed as teachers, I actually have been kind of enjoying the way that museums and galleries have been doing various things to kind of make their art available to teachers, to the public, to students, like over the pandemic. And I think that there's like, you know, there's kind of like online tours that you can go on of museums, or like various like panels that are being set up. There's kind of a lot of interesting stuff. Have you guys been taking part in any of that? What have you all been doing?
In our in our contemporary art history class, which most of us are in, we had to research and contemporary art websites and stuff. So we really found a lot, everybody did, that had really good resources for teachers and tours, and found out which ones didn't, have the greatest resources. But overall, like all the museums have really started catering to education and teachers. And I guess we didn't realize how much that we would depend on their websites until now,
Yeah.
Because we always just went on the field trips. And so their websites were not I just didn't use them,
Yeah.
But now, I mean, looking to this next year, we're probably not going to be allowed to go on any field trips at all. And so those resources that we've gathered in that contemporary history class is going to be great for me next year with the high schoolers. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, Jessica.
Okay, so mute this one, unmute this one.
Yeah.
The drawing that I did and like give you my thoughts. I know everybody was doing that and I was watching.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm still putting it together, but I just wanted to like verbally express it and then get your feedback.
Sure.
Like several times when I was looking at the logos and whatnot on the brands inside of the grocery store, they had this like kind of cut up like forms. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like that, where it's like, it's not, I'm gonna erase a lot of it, but it's like just gesture marks that create a form. And I thought of like doing this piece where there's like swallows that kind of like flow through.
Okay.
And then have like kind of like henna, like wispy, or like those kind of designs, like intercultural designs that I saw on some of the brands, like kind of stretching out and like moving around it. And just kind of creating this story from kind of like hope. Like I think of birds like moving up as like a hope kind of story where they're like moving from low to high. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I'm trying to put that on paper and it's all in my head. But that's where I'm going. What are your thoughts?
I think that sounds really wonderful. I like the idea of like, so the bird, the way it would be printed on the page, like it kind of mimics the actual movement that it would make through like space. Like, birds kind of fly every which way. And so this representational image can kind of move throughout the space of the page. But then you also have this design element that can kind of make it into maybe the symbols make more of a structured pattern and the bird flies through it and kind of breaks that pattern. Maybe it gets incorporated into it. I also think that if you wanted to, kind of like spell your own message, like you could actually essentially write out what you want to say using the alphabet and then stylize the letters so that they resembled, like, so that they had kind of curves and flourishes like the foreign script that you're drawn to, and you can cut them up. And so it's like the design element, it's maybe based off of stylized letters that like you kind of make yourself, or based off of like a message that you write yourself. So the message is there, but it's not necessarily legible. Do you know what I mean? Even if it was just like the word like hope, like you think about the HOPE, like all the different ways those letters could be drawn, and then pieces of those drawings could become symbols to work with. And it's just something to think about.
Okay, I love that. Thank you.
Yeah. Shannon sent a text. Actually, we got a few texts here. Shannon says, excuse me, I'm listening. My kids are packing Gatorade Town for the team days for 10 days. I'm going back and forth with them. And then Isaac, looks like you sent a link to an exhibition. I'm guessing this is an exhibition online. And it's Voices from Quarantine at the UNG Art Galleries, which is very cool. Alumni voices. And so this looks like work that was made. Oh, cool. This work that was made during shelter in place, which is really interesting. Yeah. That is very cool. And you yourself did this for a benefit in New Orleans? Oh, cool. What was the benefit in New Orleans? Do you remember it? Crew of Red Beans. Did you used to live in New Orleans? When? No way. Oh my God. Okay, so I went to Tulane, and yeah, totally. That's where I did my Chili Chantilly. I did my undergrad there. I was there 2000 to 2007. I did undergrad there, and I kept on living there for a couple years after Katrina. Actually, yeah. I never thought I would leave. I like, yeah, it's the best. I mean, I thought I was going to live the rest of my life in New Orleans. I mean, it was like an incredible place, and it was a great place to be an artist. Like, I did my undergrad there. I got my BFA, and I just stayed, because it was just this, like, it was in 2005. I mean, New Orleans was like a fully functioning bohemia. I mean, it's like, I didn't know anybody who had like a real job, and like, like nobody worked. And it was like pretty cheap, and there were like lots of fun things to do. It was so great. My friend Elizabeth Sicella graduated from there, is now a curator at the Guggenheim. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I ever met her. The name doesn't ring a bell. But I do. They've had a lot of cool students who've gone on to do some really cool things. Yeah. I loved Tulane. It was like one of the best times of my life.
My dad went to Tulane.
No way, really?
Both of my parents are LSU grads. My mom's from New Orleans. That's where her family is.
Oh my God. There's all these New Orleans people.
Tulane graduate, went to law school there, but yeah, I love it. Every Christmas there, looking at the lights.
Oh yeah.
Who was the Popeyes owner that used to decorate his whole house in lights? That was my that's what we did as kids.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that in years. That's right.
Yeah.
I got into Tulane, but went to FSU instead. Regrets some. Yeah. Like, I hear you. I went there for architecture because they have that architecture school. And after like one semester, I was like, I don't really know if I want to do this. And I just kind of floated for a little while and did whatever, and eventually started taking art classes, and then the rest is history. But yeah, it was great. But I do remember as an undergraduate thinking to myself, like, I feel like they should just give every student who finishes their degree here like $100,000 as just for managing to actually go to college amidst all of the greatest distractions in the world. Because I mean, it's like, you can't go to school in New Orleans and not participate in the city. Like, you just can't. And the first year I was there, I was kind of miserable because I was sort of trying to do that. I felt like the city was a distraction and I needed to only focus on school, and I was like miserable. Plus I didn't like love architecture. But the second year I started, like, I mean, I was studious and I like went to school, but I started to kind of like basically participate more in the city of New Orleans. And I felt more like someone who belonged there as opposed to just like an interloper, and, really fell in love with the city. I loved it. I think about it every day, and I haven't lived there since 2007. I still think about it. Yeah. I know. Yeah, it is. When was the last time you were there? Do you go every year?
No, and it makes me sad. So I have so many family members had just small places. We would always have somewhere to stay. Like the houses that are split up in uptown or like Garden District, and like 1-bedroom little places that people would just, my family's in Jackson, 2 hours away.
Okay.
And after Katrina, everybody they lost their place. No one got their place, and I've got nowhere to stay without paying, right? So
yeah,
not as easy.
Yeah, definitely.
I definitely want to get back, but that's I mean, I had like aunts and uncles and everybody in Jackson. All of them had some little place where you could just like kind of stay, and we lost all that after Katrina. We lost our free place to stay.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. It was such a shift. I mean, well, you guys have probably been thinking about this too. I mean, like, you know, once COVID, once people started sheltering in place and COVID really started taking off in the US, I mean, I was sort of thinking about circumstances, and I mean, you know, one thing you were hearing again and again is like, we've never lived through anything like this before, and we haven't. But I was thinking about my own life experience, and I was like, yeah, but Katrina was this thing that just affected everybody, you know, and like based off of kind of what you had available, where you were at the time, you might have recovered from it more quickly or less quickly than somebody else based off of kind of the resources that you had. But it was truly this thing. I mean, it was like a weather-based disaster. And then of course the flood and everything after that was like, well, that's like a whole other issue. But anyway, I mean, like I was in the early days of shelter in place, I found myself thinking a lot about Katrina because it was just this thing that, I mean, it changed like every aspect of life. And I remember the year and a half or so that I lived there after Katrina in New Orleans, just going to the grocery store was like a whole ordeal, you know, kind of like it is now. I mean, wearing a mask is not a whole ordeal, but I mean, it was such a shift. So Isaac, you were doing roofing and rehabbing for 3 years after Katrina, then you moved. And then you were the field supervisor for Acorn's Hurricane Recovery Program for those years. What? Yeah, that I believe. Yeah.
That's funny. That's what you need to do for
the shelves are empty except Saki.
That's funny. Saki, the logos are so cool. You should do some Saki logo prints for your print making.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they are. Oh, that's so funny. I think the last time I was there was maybe 2014. I haven't been in like 6 years. I was really good about getting back for a little while and just, but you know, a lot of my, I mean, I went there in college, so a lot of the people I knew were also college grads, and if they didn't leave right after the storm, they didn't stay longer because they just kind of went on to do other things. So yeah.
It's so funny because my son was just asking me in the car, he was asking me to tell him the story again about when we took a train ride and there was a crash, and there's a popular train from Jackson to New Orleans called the City of New Orleans.
Yeah.
We took the kids on it. It was supposed to be a fun little ride, and that might be the last time we went. It wasn't because of this, but he was little, so I guess 10 years ago, and we got stopped on the tracks, and we were stopped for a long time, and we were told that there was a car on the tracks.
Yeah.
But we didn't know the details. And then when we arrived in New Orleans and my mom was there waiting for us, there was news and everything. A car had tried to dart across and the train hit it, and there were casualties and an investigation.
Oh, jeez.
My son was he's like, tell me that story again. The only time I took a train ride, but we were talking about New Orleans, and we were just talking about it yesterday.
Yeah, that's funny. This is kind of related, but when I first moved there, I was a freshman in college, and you know, I was taking like all the required classes, and I think I was taking like biology 101, and it was because it was a required class. It was in one of those classes that's like a movie theater with like the stadium seating, and there's like 200 or 300 people in the room, and the professor is like, I mean, he was like teaching with a microphone. I remember he was like wanting to, you know, explain the class, but also kind of like get to know the students, but you obviously couldn't go around and introduce yourselves because there's like 300 people in the room. So he was like, let's just do some survey questions. Like, how many people are from New Orleans? How many people are from Louisiana? Who's ever been out of the country? And like, you would raise your hand. And then the questions got increasingly bizarre. Like, you know, how many people would say that pizza is your favorite food? Like, how many people would say that, like, you love pizza more than one of your family members? Like, it just got like increasingly weird. And at one point he said, how many people have been riding on the streetcar when it's hit a vehicle. And I was like, that's a ridiculous situation. And to my horror, like 2/3 of the room like raised their hand, and I was like, oh my God, apparently streetcars are like running into cars all the time, you know? So yeah, one of the things that I really loved about living there, and I imagine that this has kind of only increased over time, is that it seemed like something truly insane, absurd, or surreal would happen like about every 2.5 weeks. Like you'd just be minding your business, go out and have a normal day, and like the next thing you know, it's like you're in a Tom Waits song. And like, I mean, I loved that. I mean, I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is like a very, it's a very kind of traditional conservative place. And I'd never been anywhere like New Orleans before. I just loved it. I felt at home right away, you know?
I love this conversation because I feel the same. And I try to explain that to people that only visit for a minute. They only go one weekend Mardi Gras, and they don't get it. And so you have to definitely be submersed in it to get it. And then for me, growing up in a very conservative small town in Mississippi, going to New Orleans in the 80s, and it was the punk scene. And I remember seeing, I mean, it was punk. It was the hair, the spite. It was awesome. Like as a kid, I was like, oh, this is where I want to be, you know?
Yeah.
Home and everything was like monogrammed and silver and whatever. It was old fashioned.
Yeah.
And seeing just true art and punk, and it was so cool. I loved it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously like tourism and entertainment are like the primary, you know, industries of that city, right? But of course they're not the only things going on.
Right.
It's just the main thing going on. So it's like the way people live in a place that sort of presents itself as kind of this destination, as this place to kind of come and party and da-da-da-da. So it's like the people who live there all the time, like they have to kind of live in, they have to do all, like they have to live the rest of their lives like in that environment. And it makes for just a really, well, so there's that. And then I also think that geographically, there's all these combinations of different kinds of people coming together and different kinds of cultures coming together. And for whatever reason, it's like, in some ways it has progressed and in some ways it has not. And typically when you talk about a place not progressing, that's sort of like a negative thing. But the way New Orleans has not progressed is actually part of its charm. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I mean, you don't really feel like you're in America when you're there. Mm-hmm. It kind of feels like Caribbean in some ways. Yeah, I know. This is probably the longest I've talked about it with anybody in a long time, and so it's.
Let's do an offsite. I think we should all meet there this weekend. It'll be. Now I want to go. I might go next week. In between, let's all go meet somewhere in the corridor. We'll ask Isaac for recommendations.
Yeah, totally. There's a guy. I did take a group of Piedmont students there, art students, on a field trip, like maybe in 2013, 2014. And we went to like the New Orleans Museum of Art and the Ogden Museum of Southern Art. We stayed in a hostel on Magazine Street. But we also went to this guy in the upper ninth ward, in the lower ninth ward actually, has he started the Mardi Gras Indian Museum.
Oh, cool. In
a trailer in his backyard. And you got to call, you got to make an appointment, and it's like, trailer is not even really the right word. I mean, it's really like a bus that's just like parked in his backyard, and it's just filled with like, you know, feathers and photographs and all this stuff. And the only way we could get in there is that we just had to stand in a single line, kind of like down the middle of the aisle. And he would sit at the front of the bus with a microphone and talk all about this stuff. And I mean, it was just awesome. And like, I think my students were just kind of like blown away by it. But I mean, it's like, yeah, you know, this guy just runs a museum in his backyard. It was awesome. I said, Isaac's saying, okay, so you're going to go in 2 weeks. I'm jealous. I will definitely take your restaurant recommendations because I have never gotten a restaurant recommendation that was bad about anywhere in New Orleans. You know what I mean? And I went to a lot of places, but I didn't, by all means, didn't go to all of them. Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's see. So it's 10:45. So we're all drawing. How do we feel about carving and transferring? Are we feeling good? Has anyone actually started their carving or transferring or anything like that? Yeah? Okay, let's say this. I'm going to say that everybody should shoot for prepping. Let's give ourselves some variety. So let's say at least 5 stamps. 5 stamps. And, I want to stress this. Go for variety. Go for some that maybe have more carving, more detail. Go for some that are simpler, simpler shapes. Also, I think variety in size. As I mentioned, trying to do a whole pattern with a tiny little stamp, it's just going to drive you insane. And I think that if you have kind of like larger stamps that you can kind of use with smaller stamps, I just think you'll be happier when we get to the printing process. And all 5 of your stamps, like you may not end up using all of them. You may only use like one per pattern. You may combine them all in different ways. So I think that and I'm going to say at least 5. I have a suspicion that all of you guys are going to like this so much, you're probably going to make more than 5. And if you have like a whole idea for what you're going for, like Roxana, I think you've got like a whole idea about Fox going to the grocery store. And I think you should just like run with that idea, So if you need more than 5 stamps to like realize that idea, yeah, there we go. Oh yeah, that's very cool. Are those berries? Is that what the Fox eats? Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think I would just say, if you've got a vision, run with it. And if like you need more than 5 to get there, go for it. But definitely shoot for 5. And I think that everybody has got enough Moo Carve that they can definitely get 5 stamps out of it. And remember, you can use both sides. So when we come back together next week, we'll want our stamps carved. We'll want our readings done. And we'll actually be working with our acrylic paints to make printmaking inks. And I will demo that printing process. And just talk about some best practices and techniques and things like that. What else do I want to say about that? I think that is everything I want to say about that. I don't think we need to have anything else done. The second week, we're going to spend the first day printing our patterns. I think you guys will really enjoy that. And then we set those off to the side to dry. And then the rest of the week, we're just working on making our books. And like I mentioned before, the second week of the class, the pace really changes because we're really focused on kind of making a singular artwork that's a little more in depth. An artist book can be like a really elaborate thing. And so you can actually have quite a lot of, it can kind of like everything we've been doing, it could be very simple, it can be very complex. But I definitely don't want you guys to feel rushed. What I'm envisioning is that we'll sort of make an artist book that's blank so you can kind of understand how the format works. And then we'll probably make a second one that will be more individual and you can change the size, change the scale to sort of like plan your own content. And I'll have some ideas and suggestions about how to sort of think through making an artist book with different sequences. And I'll have some examples to show you and things like that. Does anybody have any questions about sort of what we need to do or kind of what needs to happen between like in our week off?
Did you tell us the readings? Did I just miss it?
I think that maybe that was actually, I think I maybe talked about that the other day when you weren't able to log in class. So yeah, let me pull that up really quick. I want to give you the page numbers and I've got them written down on my syllabus, which is on my desktop here, along with about a million other things. So let me find that. Okay. Okay, just 1 second. It's basically the next 2 chapters in the book, but I will have those numbers for you in a minute. Okay, it's opening up. My Microsoft Word program takes like forever to open up.
I can tell you, I got it right here.
Oh, you do?
I'm sorry.
That's
was
cool.
carving, I was just not even. It's the chapter on sources, which is 40, page 40. And the next chapter, which is structure. So sources and structure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Those 2 chapters, I mean, they definitely encapsulate a lot of the things that we've been talking about this week. But they go into more detail. They sort of talk about different ways to use the material. They definitely talk about the grocery store. And so I think that you might find the reading helpful because, first of all, you're sort of hearing somebody explain it better than I can because they actually came up with it. And they're also explaining it differently. And, you know, I think that just as a teacher, it sometimes can be helpful to sort of hear things from different perspectives so you can really understand like the kernel of what a lesson is about. So I definitely recommend that. And that book, you've probably already noticing there's a lot of like little exercises throughout it, some of which we've been doing, some of which I elected not to do, but all of which could be adapted for your particular class. We'll probably look at the other 2 chapters, tools, techniques, work, and play, and celebration. We'll probably look at those like throughout next week, but in kind of a piecemeal way. I really think it's the front of the book that's like the most relevant to what we're doing. Okay? Anybody else? All right. If any issues, what should we just kind of like tune out for the day? Should we kind of like end the meeting and I can like upload the video? Yeah. Okay. I want to say if any issues come up with the stamp making or the printing, well, I guess printing's going to happen on Monday. I could not find that ink pad. I don't know where I put it. It's somewhere in here. It's gone. I don't know where it is. Got sucked down the vortex. But just a simple ink pad from Michael's or from Walmart you can use to actually test your stamps. So that may be worth the investment if you don't have one. But also, I actually find that just toning them with the Sharpie really allows you to kind of see them. And I think that this really helps when you're carving too. If you color an area in black and then carve into it, you can really sort of see what your carving marks do. If any issues come up, don't hesitate to email me. I'm actually going to be doing some work for Piedmont Online over next week, so I'll be on my computer like pretty regularly all day. And so I'll be checking my email. But happy carving, happy stamp making. I think you guys will really enjoy this process. And like I said, shoot for 5, but don't stop there if you're really into it. Okay? Okay, guys. I'm gonna stop recording and end the meeting and kind of begin the process of uploading for Alice, who wasn't able to join us today. But have a good rest of your day and have a wonderful weekend and stay safe out there. I will see you not this coming Monday, but the following Monday. Okay.
Bye, you too.
See you all later.